Welcome everyone to our Meet the Author event for June. This is Shauna Collins from Central Hall Commons, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Amy Carpenter. As a life coach and former youth worker, Amy brings 25 years of experience into her latest work, Be Strong, Be Wise, in which she outlines how to establish a system with friends to be aware of potentially risky environments, recognize red flags when meeting new people, and identify and respond to cyber harassment. She is a member of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, winner of the 2018 MWPA's, please help me with this one so I don't completely butcher it,
Ilgen Fritz.
Logan Fritz Scholarship for Writers of Nonfiction. Thank you. She's a motivational speaker for Girls Inc. and Mainly Girls, and founding member of Topanga's Girl Circle, which I hope we will have time to get into a little bit more about that. But first, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome, and it's a pleasure. It's lovely to be here.
There has been an update to the Be Strong, Be Wise book, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about first how you came to write the book, and then what led to that secondary publishing.
Sure. So I came to write the first book. As you mentioned, I'm a psychotherapist, and I've been in practice for a long time. And probably for the past 10 or 15 years, I've worked primarily with women. And because I work primarily with women, I've worked with a lot of assault survivors. And at around the time of the Kavanaugh hearing in 2019, a lot of my clients who had assault histories and had seen the hope that was building in the Me Too movement really had a difficult time and were feeling a lot of kind of, emotional despair during the course of the Kavanaugh hearing. And regardless of people's viewpoint on the results of the hearing, it was a particularly challenging experience for assault survivors. So I began to work on an article at that time because I was aware of the effects on the developing brain, which is something that I talk a lot about in my books. The effects of trauma on the developing brain are significant, and most assaults occur in young adulthood. 50% of all assaults occur between the ages of 18 and 34. So you can imagine that the 18-year-old age bracket is much more vulnerable to risk than the 34 end of the spectrum. So I wanted for people to understand some of these effects, and I began to write about it. During the course of writing this article, somebody very close to me was assaulted, and I began to experience assault from a whole new angle. And I started researching and tried to find articles and books, resources that I could give to my clients, give to young people that really address the issue of prevention. And at that time in 2019, I think there are more resources now, but at that time in 2019, there were very, very few. And so I began to just put my youth worker hat on and my community organizing hat on, and just all of the experience I've had working with schools and as a therapist, and came up with a curriculum that I felt would be accessible to any young person, regardless of their life experience or maturity level. And so since that time, it's been this exciting journey of bringing it into the world. And about a year ago, I started working on book number 2, which you'll see behind me. And that is for caring adults, such as parents, teachers, and counselors who want to offer this curriculum to the young people that they love. So that's been exciting to be able to have these 2 books, because book 1 is really written to and for teenagers and young adults, and book 2 is really written to and for caring adults who want to be able to, again, learn about some of the material, learn about how to discuss sexual ethics with young people, which is something that a lot of adults shy away from. So I wanted to provide an easy pathway for those hard conversations, as well as give them access to the curriculum that they could use with young people.
adverse childhood experiences has been something that we've been seeing a lot more of, even from a social media perspective, and being able to, from the caretaker's perspective, really understand what a child is going through that's had an adverse experience or trauma, especially of a sexual nature, while they're kind of forming their personality and their self-worth system and all of these different things. I think that's a wonderful place to go next with the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been having conversations with our local homeless coalition, because we've got a lot of young people locally who are living in various kind of compromised states and are homeless. And of course, these young people are more at risk. A lot of them are LGBTQ. And the LGBTQ population, because of homophobia and discrimination, are also more at risk. So there's really a lot of opportunity to empower young people with some tools that really center around self-knowledge. That's kind of my goal, is that we can't ever say that we can prevent all assault. It's just not an issue that we can say that about. But we can give young people tools so that they understand themselves and the environment in which they live, the social scenarios that they may come across, so they have more internal wisdom for how to respond to these. So that's kind of been my mission since the book started.
There's actually an editorial review on the Barnes and Noble product page that I wanted to reference. I think that this flows perfectly well into it. It says that readers are encouraged to be proactive and evaluate their cognitive and behavioral strengths and weaknesses that impact their personal safety. Outside of that, being aware of where we need to grow in order to create a safe space for ourselves. Um, would you say that that is a major obstacle for all walks of life, all ages, or is this something that really affects more the younger crowd?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I love to talk about that question. In the classes I've taught, I'm struck by I'll say the lack of humility, which I don't think is at all unusual. I think young people possess, which is such a lovely part of this stage of life, a sense of immortality, powerful, possibility. And that's wonderful. In fact, part of, my goals in doing this work is to vouchsafe that, so that young people can bring their best selves forward without having to worry about the kind of risk that these situations, that potentially dangerous situations, present. But they don't, in that particular life stage, they don't have their full brain functioning yet. They don't have the capability of discretionary thinking, for example. We know that the brain doesn't develop fully until age 25. And so to me, it's kind of um, this perfect storm, if you will, of having this particular age bracket who's more at risk and is least likely to have the ability, mentally or through their brain function, to be able to ascertain, for example, a red flag. And it's something that in the classes I've taught is one of them. When we do our post program data, because we always collect data at the beginning and the end of every program, it's significant how many young people feel out of touch with their gut instinct. And it makes complete sense from a developmental standpoint, because their brains haven't fully formed yet. So there's a bit of, I don't know if that's making me uncomfortable because I'm just a nervous person, or there's actually something that I really should worry about. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about is how to listen to your red flag signals in a way that actually informs your life in many areas, not just around sexual safety, but in relationships in general and in future job prospects. It's a really important skill to have. And when we ask the right reflective questions, which I would say we aren't used to doing with young people. We don't think of asking a lot of reflective questions. We're used to telling them what we think that they should do. Um, but out of respect for their integrity and their stage in the growth process, it's a great time, because young people are very keen on learning about themselves, to ask the right questions in order to build that awareness of what their particular gut instinct patterns might dictate. So we do a lot of that. The whole book and the whole program is really a series of very potent discussion points that are done in a group format when we teach our classes. And it's wonderful to see young people share with each other their experiences of, how to listen to their gut, how to listen to those internal signals we get all the time and we're very used to reading as adults, but teenagers just haven't practiced yet. So I would argue we live in a time where we don't have the luxury anymore of waiting until we're age 25 to 30, which is when I learned a lot of this stuff, just being a young woman living in the city. Really at this stage with social media and with the digital age, our young people need these tools like in middle school. So that's something that we have a lot of opportunity to grow into.
Most definitely. And it seems like there's almost a translation that has to take place when you're dealing with particular age groups and trying to make these kind of reflective questions relatable in their personal situations. And I think that having it in a group setting where you're able to have everybody kind of share their own personal experience would be extremely beneficial. I would love to see something like that at Central Hall Commons. And I do think that it it may, and maybe you disagree with this, but it may help when it comes to addressing or bringing up those more difficult conversations with other people in their support group or in their circle, explaining, yeah, I went to this party and I was really uncomfortable, might be made easier by having these group conversations.
I think so. I think that studies show, and people who work with young folks know that the group process is really important. It's a life stage where peers matter greatly. Young people care much more about what the person sitting next to them in biology class might think than they do, for example, a family member. It's just what this life stage is about, and it's all for the purpose of allowing healthy individuation, for them to leave home and have a clear sense of who they are in relation to their peers. So the group process really supports discussing some of these reflective questions. And what I've noticed is that young people are really astoundingly comfortable with uncomfortable subject matter. They can talk about sexual assault, they can talk about cyber harassment, nude pictures online, somebody cyber stalking. I mean, these are all things that we're hearing a lot more of with COVID. But they're very comfortable talking about it. It's a lot of times our job as adults to get a little bit more familiar with the subject matter and a little more comfortable, because they're fully able to discuss these kinds of things. And I'm not saying it's perfect and there isn't the typical dynamic or bravado or resistance that you might see, but I have been very surprised and pleased just to see the openness and willingness on the part of young people to talk about this stuff. They know it's an issue. They were around for Me Too. They know that sexual assault is scary and something that affects their life, and that they're at risk for just being a young person in the world. So they're happy to have conversation on how to understand it at a deeper and more personal level.
I do want to dig in a little bit. We'll come back to the question of the COVID reality and how that's changed everything. But I want to first kind of touch a little bit more on the Me Too movement and um, how that's changed the conversation in your eyes.
Well, I think, I mean, Me Too move. The first of all, the Me Too movement is still happening. A lot of people think it's just kind of something way back there in 2017, but Tarana Burke, who started the Me Too movement back in the 90s, is a survivor and an advocate who is running the movement out of Harlem, New York, as we speak. And I don't think we can say enough about what the Me Too movement did for our world in breaking down the walls of secrecy. That was the biggest accomplishment of the Me Too movement, was allowing survivors to have a voice in a global way. I think in the final stage of that, it was October of 2017 when the Alyssa Milano's tweet went viral. And I think within 48 hours, 86 countries were involved. And I think that within like 8 hours, she had, 13,000 responses. So people needed to talk about it, and suddenly it was okay to do that. So we have farther to go. This is an issue that's been around since the dawn of the species. It's not going to go away with one movement. As much as this is the most important movement we've seen recently in regards to sexual assault, we've got farther to go. So I think it's about bringing as many forces together as possible, that are hopefully working in concert, and looking at prevention, looking at response, looking at public awareness, which is a huge issue. People still shy away from discussing sexual assault. In fact, I've noticed even with my work in trying to post something that is going to be under the watchful eye of Google, for example, if it has sexual, just the word sexual in the title, it's going to get kicked out. So, we've got a challenge in being able to make this a more normal discussion in order to not necessarily normalize it, but in order to effectively address it, we've got to be able to talk about it. So the Me Too movement was a huge force in allowing that to happen.
I would agree with that. I feel like there's another side to that though as well, where um it's almost like a nouveau riche situation where the floodgates open and you have this kind of excess of information or of attention, and then the concern is that it has this kind of firework moment and then it all peters out and people stop paying attention. I know that the taboo itself is a major obstacle to even starting that conversation, but in order to continue it and to move it forward and to allow it to evolve to a place where all people are able to have the conversation outside of ego. What are some of the other obstacles that you think we need to work on, or we need to overcome in order to keep that conversation going?
Oh, well, there's quite a few of them. I mean, I've discussed several even thus far in our interview. I think that people's comfort level is probably one of the biggest obstacles. We are also raising children in a time where we've kind of, the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction than it was maybe, a generation previous, in that child-centered parenting is the dominant paradigm. So children are under the watchful eye of their parents most every hour of every day, or they're under the watchful eye of somebody the parent knows. And there's nothing wrong with this. I raised my daughter the same way. I was a single parent for 10 years and she was my whole world. And she was definitely raised under the child-centered parenting model. However, we aren't necessarily, unless we compensate for that pattern through exposing our children through a lot of really important discussions with our children, they're launching into the world, I would say, at a little bit more of a disadvantage given the current time that we're in. So it's a massively duplicitous culture currently, because we've got social media and the digital age that young people may start involving themselves with at age 9 or 10. And by the way, pornography sites are now being gone on, 10-year-olds are going on pornography sites. It's becoming a massive problem for our youth, especially our young men, but young women go on pornography sites as well. So they're exposed to all of this sexual material, and yet they're sheltered in their everyday upbringing. And a lot of times they're sheltered in the kind of discussions that their parents are having at home. And it's simply because, again, we don't know how to talk about this. There is, and parents, and again, I include myself in this, parents don't even know what their young people are doing on their phones. It's a completely unknown reality, and we're very good at complaining about it, but we're not really good at addressing it in a way that actually helps young people look, again, reflective questions that build discretionary thinking, look at this reality of social media from an objective standpoint. And I think that, young people, again, are very smart. They know this isn't really real, right? But if you're exposed to something again and again and again, it's very hard for the brain not to be indoctrinated in some fashion. And we're seeing this play out in the sexual relationships of young people. And I want to just give a shout out to Peggy Orenstein, who I mention at every opportunity I can. She wrote 2 books that are both bestsellers, Boys and Sex and Girls and Sex. And any parent of a teenager or anybody working with teenagers really should get these books. They're mind blowing. And young people are talking very candidly about what it's like to use pornography for masturbation purposes all through high school, and then go to college and try and develop a healthy, well-adjusted relationship, and what ends up happening there. And it's a challenge and it's an issue. So again, we can't overestimate the need to have these kinds of effective conversations when our young people are, again, like in junior high or middle school. So
Yeah, it's a little bit of a nightmare as a parent. I came into my kind of youth awareness during the age when AOL got big. So I kind of rode that line between the digital reality and what came before. Um, but some of the things that are available now, like Snapchat, for instance, where you put a picture up and in a couple of seconds it's poof gone. Well, no, it's not really poof gone because the internet is forever. But it feels like there's almost this duality of bubble wrapping children in order for them to walk the minefield. We've got this very protective mindset. We've got this very involved in many aspects of their life without really allowing them the chance to, fall off the bike and get hurt, or really learn some of those key lessons that, as you said, they're coming into it at a bit of a disadvantage from children's of previous eras.
yeah, I mean, I think, again, I mean, there's purpose in everything. What we have going for us in this day and age is that, again, our young people are inheriting a world with a ton of problems. So, which is terribly unfortunate, and yet it just is. So what's hopeful to me is, and I, of course, I talk to a lot of young people, so I'm always impressed by the level of objectivity they have, and I would say they have to. And you're coming up into a world where we may die of global warming, we're going to lose half our species, our oceans are corrupt. I mean, it's like there's no end to it. So, and yet people are supposed to be hopeful when they're launching their lives. And I think that they're wise to be objective. They're wise to be critical in their thinking around what adults are telling them. So, and that's why I believe in this particular program and the Be Strong, Be Wise curriculum so much, because it focuses on what is intelligence for them. What is self-knowledge for them? What do they bring to the table? What do they have as a personal challenge? Because we all have personal challenges, whether it be, your common sense, whether it be your people perception, um, whether it be your communication style. These are all tools that we talk about in the program. But we all have our challenges within that, and we have our strengths. And so every young person will leave with a sense of knowing what theirs are. And of course, that's going to serve their entry into the world beyond the issue of sexual safety. Uh, but to your point, I think that we can use the reality that we are dealing with in order to be very frank and very direct in some of our conversations, because that's what young people are used to. So yeah, the opportunity is now.
It definitely is. I want to kind of touch on the difference between what an in-person program would be versus if there's a workbook that goes with the Be Strong, Be Wise book, if this is something that um, you would encourage facilitators to utilize as part of a program within their own community, especially as you said, when you get to middle school. At that point, it's almost like the seal has already been broken, the Pandora's box has been opened to a certain extent. So as far as for caretakers or for people that are group leaders, you know, anything from boys and girls clubs and big brother big sister and community centers like ours, the difference between, say, a program that you have, that you do you personally lead these, or do you have facilitators that lead these, and then the difference between that program and going through the book, if that makes sense.
Um, yes. So I think I understand the question. So the curriculum in the program is really the equal to the chapters in the center of the book. So every participant in the program gets a copy of the book. Of course, as with most things, the book contains a lot of material that isn't necessarily involved in the classes, but the classes are where all the great discussions and reflective questions take place. So, in my experience, young people are much more likely to learn when they can talk about something in the group rather than read it in a book, but they will have both resources available. And the classes are taught online and they're taught in person. So it's really up to the individual location or school or organization to decide how they want to conduct it. So there's the opportunity to take an online class, in which case there's lots of ways of doing that. There's something beautiful in doing it in person. I love to teach in person classes, and we do have a team, and my hope is that there will be more ability for other people to teach the program as we go forward, and that will happen as we go. But really, anybody who is interested has the ability to take the course. I don't want to, anybody, we can figure out a way. So yeah.
Awesome. And if you were to distill, say, that the biggest takeaway that you found, or that you hope the attendees or readers will find within the book, what would you say, if you could make it a single statement, what would it be?
I think, and I probably said it before, but it is the biggest takeaway, and I think it's self-knowledge. There's no way you can go through this book or program and not have a much deeper understanding of who you are, and what your skills are and what your challenges are, and what to do with the challenges before you. So that's way more than a sentence, but that's definitely the biggest takeaway.
Well, with self-knowledge, we're going to kind of roll back to our pandemic reality, in that I feel like a majority of us have had to kind of really address some of the shadows or the skeletons in the closet, or the work that maybe we've been very happily distracting ourselves from in daily life, until this situation happened and we found ourselves in an isolation situation. Um, how do you think that's affected not only the conversation, but the ability for people to recognize where they might fall in the spectrum of sexual assault from victim to perpetrator?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on the pandemic, and I've done some research, and I actually just wrote an article because I think that we have an opportunity with the pandemic, with this stage of the pandemic, as we're starting to have social reentry. Our young people are gathering more together. There's going to be parties. I mean, there were parties during the pandemic too, and of course, young people are least likely to follow social restrictions. But, I was amazed at how much they did follow the rules. And of course, there are exceptions to that. But because that kind of herd mentality, like, what are my friends doing? What am I going to do because my friends are doing this? When it comes to a global pandemic and everybody has to follow the rules, there's a unifying force there. So, so with the current stage that we're in, I think we can capitalize on some of those challenges that the past year and a half have given us, as far as that discretionary thinking. So young people have had to think about a social gathering before they go, whether it's going to be COVID safe. Are people going to be wearing masks? Now the question is, are my friends going to be vaccinated or unvaccinated? What about my elderly grandparents? Like, what do I do about that? And young people are asking these questions of themselves. So we have an opportunity to begin to strengthen that muscle, if you will, by asking the kinds of questions that build confidence in that discretionary thinking. Like, how do you plan a night out? How do you decide what is an okay social experience to have? And when you ask these questions, the fact that young people have been, I say kind of effectively benched from the game of life, like everybody, we've all been benched, right, for the past year and a half. But young people have been benched at a very crucial time in their development when interrelating with other teens and young adults is crucial to them. So the fact that they haven't been able to do that is a loss at a totally different scale than it would be for you or I. But I think some people are worried they're going to come back with a vengeance. They might not be as safe as they would be because they've been out of the game for so long, and we shall see. But I think it's our job as adults to prepare them by asking the right questions and looking at this as a broader issue than just how have we responded and how have we been affected by COVID-19. How has a young person been affected by social distancing for a year and a half? What do they know about themselves now that they didn't before? Is another great question. There are young people who hated the pandemic. I mean, we saw suicide rates go up. We saw anxiety and depression in young people go up, as in the whole country. Um, but there are other young people who did better with online learning, and we're fine with social distancing because that was kind of, whether they were introverted or whether, whatever was going on, it was something that worked for them. They may be more the rarity, but they certainly exist. So how a young person understands themselves now is going to be COVID informed. There's no way it can't be. So how we talk about that is going to help them build that inner wisdom for the rest of their lives, and all of their kind of social experiences.
Yeah, I feel like this younger generation definitely has a little bit more of a head start when it comes to cyber reality or digital reality and engaging on that level as opposed to the person to person engagement. And with that added to the COVID situation, it seems like it creates another dimension here that that we have to deal with the cyberbullying and things like that, which, I mean, there were already issues. There was already a lot of concern about that pretty much from the time that the internet became available to civilians. We started using it for both a positive and negative. So now, dealing with that element and dealing with those dimensions of assault or abuse or harassment, I think the youth of today are a little bit better equipped for that, but maybe we as parents are not as well informed or as able to recognize the signs or red flags of that. And I'm wondering, I know that that part of the toolbox that you have for Be Strong, Be Wise does include that. And I'm wondering if you can expand on that idea a little bit more.
Sure. Well, you make a really good point that there are aspects of what's going on with social media for young people that are very different from what their parents may worry is going on for them. And there are some very straightforward conversations that parents and caring adults can have with teens who, again, are aware that a lot of what they see online is not real, and are aware that it may actually be negatively influencing them. But again, I mean, it's the reason why, sex in our culture has grown in such a voracious way is because it's lucrative. It's titillating. We're a culture that likes that. And so young people understand that, and yet they're least likely, or at their age, they're less likely to be able to effectively process it all in a way that serves them. So some of the questions that we talk about and that are really kind of baseline starting points can even be as simple and straightforward as sharing nude pictures online, which is something that, we adults are like, oh yeah, my kid would never do that, or like, her, whatever. Well, a lot more teenagers than we think are engaging in this type of behavior. There's names for it. There's a whole counterculture or subculture that it's become kind of normal. And so what we have to do is begin to talk about, the legalities, because young people can understand much better than we can how to use social media. This is another one of the duplicities of our time. They are much more savvy than we are on social media, and they know it. So there tends to be, again, this added bravado to the already, inherent bravado of youth. Like, well, my parents don't even know how to do this, so I can handle it. But they're not aware of the effects on the brain. That's not something that gets talked about in teen circles, which is why it's so important to have conversations around pornography and masturbation ends up negatively affecting, for example, a young man's ability to perform in a committed relationship later in life. So it's fairly straightforward physiological stuff, but again, our young people aren't necessarily thinking about that. Certainly not at the middle school level, and it's something we can talk about. So we always discuss nude pictures because it is so common. And I like to tell young people, a very kind of ipso facto discussion, like it's against the law. You could actually go to jail. You could actually, and this is true because I've heard cases where this has happened, you could actually get put on the sex offenders registry for sharing a nude picture online. And these are things young people definitely don't want. That would be the worst thing in the world to happen to a young person. So when you start saying that, as much as it's a bit of a fear tactic, it's also the truth. So they begin to look at, I'm not sitting there telling them, don't do that. I'm telling them, this is what might happen if you do that. You could end up losing that dream summer job because guess what? Your employer went and investigated your online presence and found that there was some questionable behavior, and you lost that job opportunity. So we kind of have these types of discussions in a way that isn't shame based, because there's no reason to teach in that way, but empowering because it gives them the full picture. So there's lots of other things to talk about. It's an issue that certainly with COVID, there was more cyber stalking, more cyber harassment that we were seeing. And again, I'm hearing from young people as young as middle school age that requesting, for example, a nude picture is very common at the middle school level. And so much so that it becomes almost to them kind of normal, which is not to say they partake in that, but it's certainly happening. There's not a teen, I don't think there's a teen anywhere that doesn't know of another teen who, had this kind of cross their stream at some point. So we can do a lot with, again, building that discretionary thinking in regards to, the internet, for sure.
I'm so glad that you brought up the shame dynamic and addressing that and making sure that the conversation isn't derogatory in that manner, that it, as soon as you say, you shouldn't be doing that, I don't know a teenager out there that doesn't automatically check out. So
Right.
um coming
Or
from
go do the very thing you told them not to.
right,
Yeah.
and one of the obstacles that we have is that there's a level of being desensitized. The shock value of just about anything for that age group is very, very high. I think um that from media, from movies and video games and just internet and social media platforms, their acceptance of their reality as being as just instant gratification, always upping the ampere kind of a thing, where it's you always have to one up the experience that you've had, and that, without realizing it, is doing some very, very serious damage.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that, whereas when and I did not grow up in the digital age, it was more experiential pushing of the boundaries, and now so much of that pushing of the boundaries is what I see on my screen. And it's something that I have wrestled with throughout raising my own child, and watching my nieces grow up and other young people I care greatly about, is, oh, the world outside your house and your screen is waiting for you, um and we have to accept that that is the way it is. That's the way that young people are coming into the world. And who's to say it's not better or worse? We don't know. I do think, as I pointed out earlier, with the level of global problems that young people are inheriting, there's a way in which their ability to be objective, and that there's very little new news, right? Because they're seeing so much, is going to serve them in the future and in some of the battles they'll have to fight, which they shouldn't have to, but they're going to have to. So in a way, again, we can't say whether it's positive or negative. All we can do is begin to kind of hopefully guide that barge in a direction where it's not disservicing their relationships and their self-identity and their personal authority.
Definitely, because one of the elements that I think is very strong in Be Strong, Be Wise is that self-worth and kind of stepping up and owning your power, owning your place in the world, and acknowledging the worth that you have and the ability that you have to think critically and make those decisions at any age. No, it's true. What is it, the cerebral cortex is not fully attached, or some such thing, until you're 25. I know that and the whole immortality complex, especially for young men, because of frontal lobe maturation, is something that added a couple of gray hairs for me during the years. But there's the sense of not only from a singular self, but there's mention of something called the herd consciousness, and yes, having strength within yourself, but also having strength within that support system and that circle of friends that you've created this understanding with, that hey, I want to be safe and still have fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a key part of the program, and it's in the book, and we're kind of capitalizing on that life stage that's very normal for teens. They care greatly about other teens, as we've said, and how they use that in order to keep themselves and others safe. I use language a lot like, building your inner warrior, building your inner champion. We've got certain cultural forces that are working against us in regards to, for example, not to be heteronormative, but there are forces that affect young women differently than they affect young men, and of course, differently still for the LGBTQ and non-binary community. So for young women, what we focus a lot on is what I call the inner good girl, or the need to be nice, the need to go with the flow, not make anybody upset. And again, hashtag Me Too was a great force in breaking down some of the dictates of the inner good girl and the cultural force behind that. Um, and of course, there is a cultural force around the bad boy and what it is to be a sexual provocateur, and what it is to be a man in our culture. And just to highlight the fact that young men also suffer from assault, and the numbers are growing. And in fact, at the middle school level, is around equal. So as many boys as girls are getting assaulted at the middle school level. And so we teach the program to all sexes, and we do a lot of work around these cultural forces, but also really speaking to young men around what it is to be a champion. And this shows up with the class on herd consciousness, because men are physically stronger. That's generally the rule. So what a young man may do if they observe somebody of any sex who is vulnerable to risk, is, that's something we need to teach our young men, because they may have to go outside of the group in order to be a part of another type of group that's really committed to keeping everyone safe. And so we have to begin to identify, what does that look like? What's a scenario? We do a lot of, what do you do in this scenario? What do you do in this scenario? And it always prompts a lot of inner thinking, because again, these are questions that young people don't tend to ask themselves, and a lot of them are questions that may be for their future self. Right? If you're teaching a middle schooler, they probably haven't gone to a frat party yet, but they probably will one day. So
Right.
what can you
Hopefully
say?
not.
Hopefully not, but these things happen, right? So what might you do if you and your friends are at a frat party and somebody's really intoxicated and it looks as though they're in a risky situation? Even if you don't know that person and they're not a friend to you, what might you do? And we what I've observed is that young people are very aware of what the right and wrong thing is in a moment. They're very underaware of what to say. So we spend a lot of time coming up with scripts, and this applies to, again, any sex, because young people have been taught since they were small to be good girls and boys, and make people happy, be nice. And so I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I didn't want to be mean, I didn't want to hurt their feelings, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. So we come up with scripts that we practice and we role play, and again, we begin to create a new neural pathway in the brain, because the only way the brain is going to learn a new way of being is if we repetitively teach it something. So we've got to come up with a script and then practice it. And it's kind of fun to watch young people go from this kind of shy, diminutive countenance to really like stepping into their power and using their words and being assertive about it. And if there's any time where there's no room to be nice, it's when somebody's threatening your boundaries. So, we really need to and there's a lot of room for effective conversations at home with helping young people come up with their scripts.
I agree with that 100%. But I also wonder about the automatic kind of grimace that you get from youth about talking with their parents about these kind of things.
Well, that's why I'm not the parent. I'm, I'm teaching people that are not my children. And it really does make a world of difference. It's interesting. I do offer a workshop for parents and love to work with parents who want to bring this curriculum to their teenagers. And there's a way of doing it because it's such an objective curriculum. It's not that difficult because it's very laid out. But a lot of parents will say, I'm the last person my child will talk to about sex, literally. So um it's hard. It's kind of the way of things. But again, the more we talk about it and make it a normal conversation, as it is, by the way, in many other countries, the more that we're able to have, again, conversations at home, at school, anywhere.
Definitely. And I like that you brought up school. This is something that it might be a little bit of pushing the boundary question, but why do you think, we had all of this drug awareness training and things like DARE and whatnot in school. Why was sexual assault and awareness ability to have those conversations or working out some of those scripts for, they do that for having a beer or smoking a joint, but they didn't do that with boundaries or recognizing when you're in an unsafe situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that. And I can only share what I have observed in my research and in my own experience. And I've mentioned it already. I think one of the layers is that it's a taboo subject. It's something that it's astounding to me. It's a taboo subject considering it happens every 92 seconds in our country, but it's still a taboo subject, so we don't know how to talk about it. I mentioned the Google. If you have the word sexual, you're not going to be able to display anything. So there's all this kind of cyber uh, scrutinization that's happening. But I also think, and this is something that I talk very directly about in my book, because I think we kind of have to just talk directly about it. I think that people are afraid of even remotely doing any kind of victim blaming. Victim blaming has permeated our culture like a cancer, and there isn't a single survivor I've worked with in 20 years of practice that doesn't have an element of victim blaming that they've had to overcome. And I'm a survivor myself, and I've had to work on that element within my own healing path. So I think that we are afraid, if we talk about prevention, that may border on victim blaming. In other words, if you could prevent assault, is it in any way your responsibility to prevent assault? And that could possibly take the charge off the offender. So what I talk about in my book is there's two separate issues. We have response and we have prevention. There is no way in any stratosphere of conversation that you can talk about an assault and look at what the victim could have done differently. That just is not, it's not a place to do it. It's not appropriate. That's victim blaming. When you are teaching young people who are getting ready to launch into the world, and I'll just use women as an example, only because 90% of assaults are against women, and you're teaching a young woman how to use her inner authority, how to use her common sense, I don't believe that's victim blaming. I believe that's empowering and giving them agency. But not everybody believes that. That's my belief as an educator and as a psychotherapist and somebody who's done a lot of research, but not everybody believes that. So I think we have a bit of a challenge there in acknowledging and just openly acknowledging there are assaults that are preventable and there are assaults that are not preventable. In neither scenario is it ever the victim's fault. 0% of the time is it ever the victim's fault. But we have to be able to talk about the fact that there are assaults that are preventable. And what can we do to empower our young people to understand what the variables are that inform an assault outcome, which, by the way, alcohol is the number one variable. How they understand those variables, because then they can control for them. And to me, that's empowerment. That again crosses all into all categories, not just sexual assault prevention.
Thank you. I do want to kind of open this up if there are any questions from the gallery, or I wanted to take a look on our Facebook and just make sure that we didn't miss any last minute questions. I do want to also remind people they can find the Be Strong, Be Wise books. There's actually on bestrongbewise.com/book. You can find a whole list of places to purchase the book. Also amycarpenter.net, and I will put those in the chat as well so that people can take a look at the myriad of things that you've been doing. I think a lot of your work kind of melds in together, even as far as the Kundalini yoga work that you've done.
Yeah, there's a lot of mindfulness, techniques that I certainly use in my psychotherapy practice every day, but they come into the program too.
And if there was any additional takeaways that you wanted to share with our listeners, or any advice that you could give to them before we close, I want to kind of open the platform for you to do that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think this is something that is going to be an opportunity for a long while to come, and we there's several different things I could say. Again, I'm amazed at how, and perhaps this is a product of child-centered parenting, amazed at the strength and authority young people possess, and we have an opportunity to learn from them. I think I learn from everyone I teach. And some of the challenge, I think, for adults who may be listening would be understanding your own story and understanding your own experience, especially if there are women or mothers that are listening. Usually we all have a story, and so understanding how that story has shaped us and what our own inhibitions are, what our own internal challenges are with having these conversations with young people is such an important starting place. I mean, first of all, it helps us be more conscious and more aware of who we are in the world, but it also is a gift to our young people to know that that particular obstacle we've dealt with. Like, we've looked at our story, we've kind of done what we needed to do to understand how to work with the past so that it doesn't negatively affect the present. The other thing I think is, just as a very straightforward starting point, is people who want to begin talking with teens around the issue of sexual ethics can start with the definition of sexual assault, which most young people do not know. In my experience anyway, most young people aren't aware of just how broad that definition is, but there's three operative words: unwanted sexual touch, that are in the sexual assault legal definition. And those three words are the foundation point of our program, and they can be the foundation point of teaching or having really effective conversations, because unwanted sexual touch is going to be different for each and every young person. Some people are really touch averse, as we know others are very touchy feely, but really beginning to ask the question, what does unwanted sexual touch mean to you? And what does it feel like when somebody is threatening that boundary? And then, of course, what do you say in order to protect yourself in the moment? These are all very straightforward questions that, even if you have a resistant teenager, and they can be resistant, But even if you have somebody who doesn't want to listen, I guarantee you're planting a seed that at some later point in their life they'll remember and they'll go back to.
Definitely. And I want to thank you again so much for joining us today. Amy, I cannot wait to get a hold of the Be Strong, Be Wise that is available at the Thompson Free Library in Dover Foxcroft. I'm not sure how many copies we have, but I will wait my turn patiently. I would love to speak with you more about potentially getting some programming at Central Hall Commons that addresses these very important issues. And I wanted to, again, open the floor if you have anything in addition that you would like to share, any upcoming courses or events. I know you said you were working on the second book, but please share and let us know.
Yeah, so the second book is done and published and available. It's I'm redoing my website currently, so it's going to be added. In fact, I think they already added it, so it's on the website currently. But there will be all of the programs are available there. How to get a hold of me, what our team is up to right now. We're doing a lot of regular media posts and updates. So really everything can be found on the website. But I love talking about this issue, as you can tell. So if anybody wants to reach out to me directly, they're welcome to. I'm at amy@bestrongbewise.com. So it's very easy to remember.
Thank you again, Amy Carpenter. Be strong, be wise. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shauna. It was a pleasure.